And you're listening to a Chameleon Academy live session. And I'm going to start bringing on some people that we're going to talk about chameleon hatchlings. And this is essentially a chameleon from egg to about 3 months old. Generally speaking, our care, we talk about chameleons from 3 months old and on. But lately, so that leaves a dearth of information about what to do before that. Generally, people haven't been worrying about that, but more and more people are starting to look into hatchlings and having to uh, deal with the hatchling stage. And there's a little bit different care from hatchlings to adults. And so, what I'd like to do is bring on some experienced people who can, we're going to have a roundtable discussion about hatchlings. Now, before I bring everybody on, I just want to say if this is being streamed live to both YouTube and to Facebook, if you are on YouTube, please use the chat and I'll be able to tell exactly who you are because your name will show up. If you are on Facebook, Facebook, because of privacy, doesn't allow me to know about what your name is. And so please enjoy the chat. But if you've got some questions, type your name on it, and that way I'll be able to tell who you are. So, all right, let us start bringing on some of our guests here. Let's see. This is Chris Young. Chris, say hello to everybody.
Hello, hello.
All right, good audio check. Chris is our Canadian keeper. Let's see. Let's bring on. There is Sean Mcneeley.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, good, good. And Jonathan Hill. Hello, Jonathan.
Hey, guys.
All right, looks like we are all here. And thank you, Jason. So, what I'd like to do is start off and have each one of you introduce yourselves and talk about the theme for today is hatchlings. And we're going to be talking about the care from egg to 3 months old. And so, just focusing on what the differences are of the care between adults and hatchlings. And so, that's the context. Let's go ahead and start in the order of clockwise that I see on my screen. And Chris, go ahead, give us a brief introduction to who you are and what you do.
So my name is Chris, obviously. The species I work with are Jackson's Xantholophus and Parson's chameleons. The Parson's is a new project, so when I say working with, it's fingers crossed that I'll be able to do something with it. I've certainly spent enough money to give it a good go, but yeah. So, but in terms of hatchling care, I think all of us here, me included, I started raising hatchlings individually, so I actually haven't ever group raised hatchlings. So
Okay.
yeah, and I say hatchlings. I mean, Jacksons are live bearers. I have hatched out IPardalis, but yeah, babies I raise individually. So
Okay. All right. Jonathan, you're next.
Sorry. So, yeah. So, I'm hearing an echo. Are you guys?
We're not hearing an echo, but I do hear you loudly.
Okay. I'll just deal with it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've worked primarily with Pardalis, and I've started with the goal of raising them individually. I've been forced into group raising in various situations, so I've done it, and I've used a number of different methods to raise them. So whether that be tubs or straight into dragon strain near street cages from hatch, or some of Dale's new cages, the condos and other things. I've done bioactive, I've done sterile. So I've done a combination of different things with hatchlings and Pardalis. And about 2 years ago, I started a small project with Furcifer minor, and for those, Frank has been very clear that they don't do well in groups. They're not like Pardalis, for example, um, and so those are individual from the beginning, no matter what.
Yeah, hey, Jonathan, we are starting to get that echo. Are you able to put on headphones?
Yeah, let me
Or
I'll do it.
earbuds? We can go on to Sean. All right, Sean, while John, we'll come back to you on that one. Go ahead, put in, see if you can find some earphones or something. And Sean,
So I'm Sean
we'll jump to you.
I'm from Cleveland area. I'm owner of Mcneeley Exotics, which is kind of a hobby more than it is a job or anything for me. And I've been raising chameleons for a few years now. I've done with the Xantholophus. I've worked with Jax. I've worked with let's see, hoehnelii, let's see, ellioti. Now all of those are live bearers, so no eggs, but we get them real small and got to grow them up. I've worked with quadricornis, both the graciller and the quads, and I'm starting to work with panthers and a few other species I'm not talking about at this point yet. I've raised them both individually and in groups. I've never really raised them in groups for any period of time. I've raised them if I'm in trouble and I've got 70 hatchlings or 70 babies. Yes, I'm in trouble. The first month or less, I kind of put them together in a big tub and do what I need to do. Then I break them up into 5s and 4s. I don't go any less than 4. I don't go any more than 5. But then my goal, my ideal, is to raise them individually. You can see like right behind me, those are my individual cage I build. I've got hundreds of cages. I got about 100 cages that I have to raise them individually. I think it's important to give them that individual time. I think it's important to let them be by themselves. So it's really important to have less stress. I think, Bill, you've talked about chameleon health points and the idea that all the stressors that cause problems. With the Xantholophus and the Jax, it's really important that they get a temperature drop at night and that they're raised individually. The percentage of actually live at the end of the 4 or 5 months before we actually, as much as 6 months before I sell them, is much greater. It's like 98% when I raise them individually and I drop them into the 50s. If I do it anything else, you could lose half or more of your babies, and that's not good. I think when the chameleon enthusiasts, we see so many people online telling us how everything's great, they're raising them in groups, and then months later they talk about how they're down to 1 or 2, and I think it's because they haven't dropped the temperatures and they haven't raised them individually.
Okay. Well, the next question was asking about what kind of benefits you see. Oh, actually, Jonathan is back, so we'll get to that question. Jonathan.
I guess. Sorry, I was trying to multitask too much leading up to this. So
Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and go back to your introduction as to what you do.
Sure. So I primarily work with Panther Chameleons and have been raising them individually from the beginning. Have been forced into group raising in various situations when, simultaneous hatches occur, and I just can't. It's tough to get all the cages ready in time, but the goal has been to raise them individually, and so I've invested to do that. And about 2 years ago, I started working with Furcifer minor, and have raised them individually as well.
All right. Well, let's go on and talk about individual raising, because that takes a much greater investment in both time, space, resources, money.
Yep.
So starting with you, Chris, what kind of benefits do you see? Why is it worth it to do individual?
So, I mean, again, without having ever group raised, I'm lacking something to compare it to. But I mean, it is sort of very common for people to lose, have mass die-offs of young Jackson's chameleons at the 3 to 4 month mark. And having chosen to individually raise from my first litter, I mean, we had 100% success with that litter, and I think we're still at the 99% mark. So you know, and I think, as Sean said too, like, raise them alone and get them cold, and you will have success with jacks. So yeah. Maybe I'm just lucky, but that's been my experience with individual raising. Also, I mean, the growth rates are more stable across the whole litter. Everybody's growing at the same rate.
Yeah.
So
That's definitely a key thing I've seen is like when I hear a lot of people talking about runts and like smaller animals and how they all grow at different rates, and I'm like, no, they don't.
yeah,
That's-
yeah, because they're fighting for food.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jonathan, you've done this extensively and on the business level. And so, first of all, what kind of what kind of decision is it? It's a big decision for you to decide to do it individually.
Yeah, it is a big decision, and the way that I've always thought about it from a business standpoint is it helps you scale at a pace that's correct. You can scale a group raised project at a rate that's just going to get you in a really bad place really fast. But if you scale with the goal of raising them individually and you realize how much it's going to cost each time you're like, oh, if I'm going to do 2 clutches simultaneously, I need 60 cages. Oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. And then it forces you to slow down. It forces you to say, wait, I
Yeah.
actually don't need that many females. I actually don't need that many breeding pairs. And it forces you into a good place from a business standpoint because of the quality outcomes that you get. You're not sitting there being like, oh, I need to wholesale off like a whole clutch just to make room for the next 2 clutches. And like the business benefit you get from that slower incremental build where each year you're investing in more, you're growing, and you're investing more the next year and the next year. And so every year you look at your business, you look at the number of females you plan to work with, and you make sure that your female to cage ratio is manageable, and you don't get more females when you don't have more cages. That's that simple. And the the but yeah, it's also the kind of thing where you look at the investment and the clutch, and you know some clutches you're just not going to make any money, and then that's when you're scaling. And so I'd say for the first 3 years, I didn't take any money out of the project at all. And I just put it right back into cages and misting systems and everything. And so every clutch that I got through in that first year of growth, or second year of growth, third year of growth, was right back to cages, right back to equipment. And then it wasn't until my 4th year where I actually had some profit. And I think that's good because by the time I was profitable, um, I had a really solid infrastructure in place. So
Yeah, and I want to echo the the concept that you brought forth there is slowing down the breeding. One problem we have with chameleon breeders is they breed their first clutch. They say, "Wow, this is great," and then they hold back 10 females, thinking, "Hey, 10 times the amount of babies, and I'm going to get all sorts of profit from this." And that's when we lose our breeders because they implode. The babies don't do well. They start biting each other. They start fighting, and it's too much. So it's very easy to get
yeah,
yourself caught in that trap. And what Jonathan's talking about takes discipline. You have to limit yourself and slow yourself down, and that's hard when you're enthusiastic about being the next great chameleon breeder.
100%. You got to purpose. It's a purposeful rate that you're going to grow at. You're thinking specifically about what's manageable, not what's not like volume, because you want to be extremely selective as well from a business standpoint, because the demand isn't high enough to produce like a ton of animals and keep the price at a profitable price. And
Hmm.
every breed, like a lot of breeders, learn that the hard way. Um, and if you're very selective and deliberate in the way that you build your project, it will be profitable because you have top quality stuff and you're producing top quality stuff. And you're not in a situation where some of the lower quality things are forcing you to scale up your infrastructure, increasing your costs, not really profitable. Um, so from a business standpoint, it actually is a pretty natural thing. Um,
Okay. Sean, you got in, you started talking about it, got us started on this, but we'll go ahead and give you the floor.
I have the advantage and disadvantage of being a hobby breeder. So the advantage is I don't have to make money. I got a day job, does great. I could put money into it. The disadvantage is if I don't treat it like a business, it becomes a problem. I'm also got a huge appetite. I already went through the number of species I've had. When you have two or three of those, each dropping babies at a time, Xantholophus can drop up to 60 babies at a time. Ellioti, in the 20 range. Quads, they have eggs, and at least you got an idea of what you got coming. You get a little better. And quads, though, you can't get any more of those, so you don't want to lose a single quad egg anyway, anyhow. So it's very important that you do that. So I raise everybody as if they were a quad. I put them in these cages I got behind me. These are actually cages that are being cleaned. I just brought them upstairs to get them cleaned. So they don't even look as good as they would when they're really regularly built. They've just been used, but they're individual cages, 8 by 12 by 6 by 18. I built them myself. I also have some that I bought as well, but I fill it full of plants. I fill it full of things for them to jump and walk on. I've got a fogging system that I put up top. I hand misted all the babies myself. I have special lights for them, keeps them warm. I don't put heat lamps on them, but I keep them warm. Make sure they get the UVB. But when you do that, you can't even see them. I've got chameleons that babies I haven't seen in 2 or 3 days. But if I've got poop on the bottom and I've the crickets disappear, they're either running around my house somewhere, which hopefully I'm not in trouble for, or they're gone. And if there's poop on the bottom, I know that they're eating, that they're doing well. Occasionally, I'll see them basking. Um, Most recently, I got a couple of crusted chameleons that I hatched from eggs. I see them once a week, maybe if I'm lucky. I take pictures of them every time I see them because I see them once a week. But the crickets go in, they eat, they do well. I just it's a great opportunity to see them grow. I love watching them grow. I have a hard time selling them. The quads,
yeah,
I've only sold a couple. I have a bunch of them that I just, they're all related, but I'm keeping them because I just won't give them up because I'll
yeah.
never get any more. So,
Those
but
those
I
are
think
awesome, man.
even the other ones, I just don't want to give them up. So that's the disadvantage and advantage. I'm not trying to be a business, but I need to behave like a business so that I don't have 55 other reptiles. I actually got rid of all my many of my other reptiles. I still have a bunch of other different species, but I got rid of all my monitors, a bunch of other things because I need to spend more time and have the proper time to do it. And raising them individually makes you do that, but it actually is better for the chameleons. They grow bigger, they grow faster. I don't lose them. You don't go down to the basement and see, oh no, I've got a cage with something dead in it. You don't have to pick anything out. That's a horrible feeling. Even though you may have 80 of them, one of them missing is a horrible feeling. So why put yourself through it when you can do it right? But you also, like John said, you really need to slow down, take your time, build slowly, build reasonably. And I can get rid of my chameleons easily because I've got a reputation that my chameleons are good.
Yeah.
When I take them to a show, I take them to a show in something this size because I don't want to put them in a bucket or a little plastic container and show them off that way. I want people to know what they need to look like, and people may comment on that, and then they buy the wild caught. They come back 2 months later with the dead, having lost their wild caught, and they bought the captive bred for me because they figured it out. It's one of those crazy things we could talk about forever too. But raising them individually, raising them from small to 3 to 6 months, which Jacksons, we don't sell them until they're 5 or 6 months old because they have that drop off. Although, like we said, it's mostly due to not being individually raised and not getting the cool temperatures. And they do a little better when they get to be adults when the cool temperatures don't seem as important. So get into somebody who doesn't have quite the cool temperatures, you do better.
Jonathan,
Yep.
I'm wondering for you, your Pardalis, what kind of difference in growth do you see?
Twice the speed, for sure. I mean, I would say about twice the rate of growth. And usually there was a period of time where I would post, like when I was just getting started, and I would post a 3-month-old chameleon, and everybody be like, "That's not 3 months old. That's 5 months old," and that was, and it just kind of became a thing, which was funny. But to me, it was I felt very proud of what I was doing, and as a breeder, it's exactly the kind of comment you want to see. Like when I go to shows and I have people say, they'll walk past my booth and they say, "Oh, look, that guy's selling plants." I'm like, "Yes, I win."
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
yeah, those are the moments for me, that make it fun. And so I know that, and I've always been about quality. I've always thought that, like, these are the things that you should be proud of. And so um that's been my approach. But I think that, I wrote an article recently about the UVB growth, different UVB levels and growth rates, and measured their weights every 2 weeks, like Michael Nash did. And the that was a lot of fun, and you could see the exponential growth path of these animals, that where they just take off at about 6 to 8 weeks, somewhere in that range. And if they're in groups, only one will do that.
Mhm.
and the others will sit down at the base of the exponential launch, and never really start to take off. And so you'll end up with a quote unquote alpha, and you'll never get to see the genetics of all your males, because you're just seeing the one that goes boom, and that's it. But if you have them out individually, they all go on the exponential path, and you get to see what you have, as a breeder, and as a customer. Like, you get to pick among animals that are showing you their potential, versus animals that are all submissive and dark. So for panthers, it's especially useful.
Okay. Chris, what do you look for when you're putting together a hatchling cage?
What do I look for?
Yeah. What's important about it? And the context of this question is somebody saying, "Okay, this sounds great. I want to put together a hatchling cage." What things should they look for?
I mean, it's an adult cage in miniature. So I would, first of all, when choosing an enclosure, regardless of whether it's an adult or a baby, I mean, you choose the enclosure that makes it easy for you to hit the care parameters in your situation. So if your house is 15% humidity, you probably don't want an all-screen cage or something along those lines. So those are general considerations that apply to caging in general. But yeah, as far as sort of what I do for hatchling or neonate enclosures is I basically create an adult closure in miniature. So densely planted, lots of horizontal branch work. I have a real like for 1/8-inch hardware cloth over screen, just because I don't like dumping 20% of my UVB before it gets through the cage. But other than that, yeah, I mean, and I also use soil substrate on all my neonate enclosures too. I'm feeding 70 plus babies right now, and if I had to clean poop
Okay.
from 70, so yeah, I mean, yeah. So you have fun with that. You have kids, right? Right, Jonathan? You make them.
I do.
Yeah.
Well, they're 4 and 2, so they'd make more of a mess than. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, no, so I just like I can't possibly. I'm one guy. I can't possibly keep up with 70 babies in their poop. So I use, soil substrate, full bioactive. Each individual enclosure has a dedicated mist nozzle. A live plant. There's these great deals at hardware stores sometimes when they're blowing out tropical stock at the end of the season. You can buy like trays of miniature hibiscus, cutting size for like 75 cents, and you toss them in there.
No, I just saw that recent post by Michael where he had put the peas and grass into the soil.
Yeah.
And I have all these cover crop seed that I've bought for the season in my garden. And I'm like, oh, I can put those in there. And
Toss
so
it
I'm
in.
gonna try it out for sure.
All right. Well, Jonathan, you do a combination of soil floors and clear floors. What are the pros and cons?
So the thing I like about the clean ones is quarantine, obviously. And like if you have an issue, it's nice to have a mix of cages because you can quarantine, you can do fecals on those animals, you can do more, you can watch them more closely. So having sterile setups in your caging strategy is really useful for that. So as soon as you see, hey, there's an issue, you can investigate in those steriles and make sure that anything that's going into a soil-based enclosure has been through quarantine. You identify the issue, you isolate it with the sterile quarantine enclosure, and before you're moving them into the soil, because it's going to be a throwaway. Like if something gets into your soil-based enclosure, it's a throwaway. So that that's the biggest thing that as I've started to become better at things like putting things under the microscope and being able to do my own fecals, and that's been over the past couple years where I've started to try to develop that skill set.
But Jonathan, if we're talking about captive bred chameleons, why are we worried about parasites?
Well, because over the past year, when I found it initially in early 2020, I started doing a pretty serious quarantine on captive bred animals that I was receiving, and more than half of them had parasites. So we've also seen prevalence studies elsewhere referenced where captive bred animals have a high prevalence of different parasite infections, and so even if you're getting animals from a captive source, the probability that it has some kind of parasitic infection is above 50%.
I think Chris Anderson released or shared a paper about captive bred reptiles at a reptile show. It's just, so
it's a high prevalence, and I can say, like I speak in generality, but I haven't gotten any of these animals at reptile shows. I've gotten them from reputable sources. So
yeah, and I think it's a good thing for us to realize, everybody, the community, to realize that captive bred animals aren't always, and in fact, maybe rarely, free of parasites. But also, don't panic about that.
yeah,
There is a load of parasites that's, I don't call it natural, but it's natural and it's not necessarily harmful.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a pathogenic load, and then there's a load that isn't going to affect the animal, and there's a whole group of people that argue that they're even beneficial, and I'm not in that group, but there's some. Yeah.
I mean, so like certain pinworms were, I could have sworn I read something that they're actually commensal parasites for tortoises, and they actually help in digestion and stuff like that. So they're not all worry cases.
It's a balance.
And so it's worthwhile to know what's in your chameleon, but I also want to re-emphasize, don't panic. Let's know what's in there, but we also don't know how dangerous this is, and some of it may not be dangerous at all. So
Yeah, it's like when people started doing more screening for cancer, we found cancer and then we were like, oh, we need to treat that, but there's a balance that we're still trying to determine where when do we actually need to treat it when we find it, because we're just screening for it more. And so that's definitely a good way to think about parasites, I think, is like, as we screen for them more, you're going to find them. But when you try to make that treatment decision, it should be with the help of a vet and um,
Yeah.
with a
And,
professional.
and
Important thing
so,
here
yeah.
is you need to realize that the treatments aren't benign.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
risk from treatment, there's risk from treatment, there's long-term side effects from treatment, and it's the same balance. You've got that, you keep the chameleons cold at night. For certain chameleon types, you make sure they have the right light, you make sure they have the right calcium, you make sure that if they have parasites and the parasite load gets high, then you've got a problem. Most of these reptiles have this parasite load. You didn't even know about it. You didn't care till you know about it. Now you know about it, you freak out. Well, that's not necessary. You need to keep them well. You need to keep them individual, not stress them out, not have two males looking at each other 6 inches apart because you don't have cage room. You need to take good care of them, and the parasite issue is not as big a deal. You still want to know what's going on. I mean, there's some things like Cryptosporidium you don't want anywhere near your building because it spreads so quickly and it's so hard to get rid of. But some of these parasites, they're just, I get a lot of wild caught because I try to get new bloodlines, and I've got a separate room. I treat it like the CDC, not quite, but I treat it like a different room. I wash my hands in and out of there. I wear gloves. I do everything, but you still have that risk of spreading it. So, don't panic about it. Just take it easy. Be comfortable that they may have them, and treat as your vet suggests, and make sure that the treatment that you're getting isn't going to kill your chameleon. I mean, if the cure is worse than the problem, then it's a mistake.
Hey, you know what, Sean? We got someone in the comments who's an interesting. Could your mic be set to the laptop mic instead of the headset?
I apologize. I don't know. The reason I put the headset on was because the mic is.
Yeah, but
you mean I'm still backwards?
As in, maybe in the computer, it is taking your audio from the computer mic instead of the headset.
Let me see what I can figure out. I'll keep working on it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I also saw a comment about the store-bought cricket source for parasitic diseases, and Chris and I have talked about this. Chris sent me a good article on it where they had tested a bunch of feeders for parasitic loads, and they found high numbers of parasites in feeders, and but they didn't do the species to parasite analysis where they're like saying, are these crickets are these parasites actually reptile parasites, or are these just cricket parasites? Or they didn't do that next level, which is important. And because for a lot of these direct life cycle parasites, the feeder needs to come in contact with the feces of its host. That's the beginning of the direct life cycle. So you have often a parasite that's a 1-to-1 species, the parasite species to the host species, and poop needs to, like, poop is part of the cycle. The parasite needs to touch the poop, and so if you're getting it from a store bought, cricket farms, the only risk is if that cricket farm is also breeding the species you have. And if they've brought those crickets in from someone who's breeding that same species, because you need to have that direct life cycle for the parasite to come from a feeder. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. It's most likely not the store-bought cricket, unless you know that store that you're getting crickets from has all the species that you have. And so then in that case, it could very, very likely come from the store. So, but if it's a big cricket farm that specializes in crickets and they don't have reptiles, then very low probability.
All right, Sean, you back? Nah, now we can't hear you.
Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah.
Oh, yep, we can hear it.
Is that good? Is that back where it's supposed to be?
I think that's better. Let's try this for a little while.
Okay.
Yeah, that works.
All right, then you get the next question. What kind of things do you watch out for, as in what is dangerous about a baby cage? When you're setting up a baby cage, what kind of things do you see say, wait a minute, that's not good?
Anything that's sharp, anything that could injure them in any way they can escape because they're so much smaller. And the biggest thing that kills lizards is heat. It's not the cold, it's the heat. So making sure that my lights are high enough above, that there's airflow, that they're not going to get too wet and they're not going to get too humid. Making sure that they're not going to dry out and they're not in a different location than anything else are the big things I'm looking for. I'm looking for adequate size. Ideally, I put all my babies in 2 foot by 2 foot by 4 foot or larger cages and it started from there. It's amazing what happens when you do that. When I have one, I put them in the biggest cages until I run out of cages. And then when I run out of cages, I start putting them in the baby cages. So there's, everybody's worried that they're going to not be able to eat. But come on, they're born in Africa. They're born in the safari. It's not like there's food everywhere all the time. They've got to go find it. And they survive, and they've survived for thousands of years. A 2 foot by 2 foot by 4 foot cage for a creature that gets several inches big. The little ones, they're thumb size, they're thumbnail size. They're still able to eat. So you can put them in a full adult cage. And like Chris said, you just shrink it down. These cages behind me, these are very difficult to get exactly right. Even though I have bins of them and I have them all set up the same way, I have the misters set up. I hand mist, so I set it up the same way. I have the fogging set up all the same way, but each one is a little bit more distant from the fogger. The light may be just a little bit off. So you have to really make sure that you have everything dialed in. And the smaller the cage, the more you have to dial it in. And that's why I never recommend that people who haven't done it for a long time get smaller and smaller. I've gotten smaller and smaller over time, and I've got better at smaller and smaller, but sometimes I pay the price because you just don't see the changes. You don't see a light goes out, your UVB one light goes out, and you have it over 12 cages because all the cages fit under the light, because I put these back to back so I can use one UVB bulb and I use the 12.0. But if that light goes out, I've lost my light to all my cages. And it's not like the chameleons wake up one morning and say, hey, you didn't have your UVB light on. The other 3 lights are still shining. There's bright. That's what gives me the warmth. So you have to check everything. You have to check it regularly, and you have to check it on schedule. I think I went further than the answer, but
Oh, please go. Take it, run with it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's talk about caging. If somebody is going to have, let's just say, an individual a Panther Chameleon. We all know that eggs are being sold, so some people are going to be hatching out a baby Panther Chameleon. What should they consider for a cage? We'll start with you, Jonathan.
So I haven't tried a hatchling in a 2x2x4, but that sounds cool. I think that
It's a lot of fun. You wouldn't
I-
believe how much fun it is.
yeah, I think that would be awesome. And my main I think that most people, the concern with starting with the big cage is primarily based on the fact that when people are getting an animal too young, there already is some issue. There's some issue present in when you're getting an animal too young. And so when you put them in a big cage and they aren't physically active and they aren't behaving like a normal chameleon, then maybe the big cage is going to be a problem in that case. But if you're hatching one, possibly you go right into the 2x2x4, and they'll thrive in there. But I mean, Bill, you've done a great job talking about how to repurpose a larger cage for a hatchling, and I think that I would point people towards a lot of the content that you've produced around that topic. I'd recommend that for them, I think, because it'd be a huge cost saver rather than having throwaway equipment. But I think in the recent discussions where you talked about things like how to repurpose like a coil UVB in a small space for a hatchling because it could work for them, that's going to be a throwaway expense. So it's
Yeah.
just kind of those would be balancing acts. It's like you could use something like that for a hatchling in a smaller cage and then scale up to a larger cage. That's an option, or you could just start with the larger cage, um, and and make sure that there's enough scaffolding at the right level away from the UVB with the UVB raised up so they can't get into a dangerous range. And then as they age, lower it down and remove some of that scaffolding and just kind of adjust as they grow. So that would be something that they could consider. But yeah, if somebody has an egg and they're hatching it out, there's a lot of good stuff that's been put out here, and you could reach out to any one of us. We'd be happy to help.
How do you heat your babies?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. The UVB T5 is enough heat for the most part. Like I've found that when I add heat, they can desiccate. They get dehydrated. It's harder to keep it in balance. There's no real benefit. And if you just utilize the heat that comes off the UVB for that first 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, that's adequate. And I usually start adding it right in the what I would consider a juvenile stage.
Okay. And what kind of UVB do you offer?
I use T5 6%, and I have some enclosures where I've raised it up 4 inches off, and then I have others where it's sitting right on top. And then I have a couple of different fixtures. So different fixtures have different strengths as well, and so um, I have like some dual bulb fixtures, especially when I have the soil bottoms like Chris talked about. Then I'll have a 4-foot T5 with 2 bulbs, one for plants and one for UVB. And those are a little bit weaker than if you have a single bulb. And so if I have a single bulb, I try to raise those up. If it's a double, I'll put it right on top. But yeah, that's
Okay.
often what I do. So.
Okay. Chris, how do you deal with heat and UVB for your hatchlings?
So, I
or
mean,
babies?
I have rarely been in a situation where I've used a basking bulb. I don't use them in the greenhouse. I don't offer any additional heat above the UVB bulb. And I think, especially if you're running a multi-bulb fixture where you have a UVB plus your plant bulb, I mean, those things do give off heat. So I like, I also like really don't think lots of hatchlings need to see anything above 80 degrees, like ever.
Okay.
So most adults too. So yeah, I mean, I don't use basking bulbs. I mean, my situation's a little different. They're in the greenhouse. We have sunny days in winter, and in the greenhouse when it's sunny in winter, they're basking in sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit different. But yeah, in terms of basking, I don't know. I think my situation probably makes me not the best person to ask about that. Yeah.
All right. Sean, how about you? What do you do for heat and UVB?
I think that heat is something we overuse in reptiles. People talk about this reptile needs 220 degrees. This reptile, not chameleons, but this reptile needs 95, 85. And the more we heat them, the quicker they die because their metabolism, they go so fast. Same thing with babies. I don't heat babies at all. Now, I do use quad fixtures. I use a 12% bulb in the middle, and I raise it up 6, 8, 10 inches. I use a UV meter to check. I check weekly, hopefully, at least every month. I check every single bulb to see where they're at, check the basking bulb in a couple of the cages because they're all in the same kind of distance. And I lower or raise my because I've got them unchanged, I can lower or raise my lights to make them appropriate. That also keeps temperature. In a cage like this, which is only 18 inches tall, I want to keep the bottom at 68 to 72 and the top at under 80. And so 6 or 8 inches above with the 4 quad light, I've got a UVI between 3 and 4, and I've got, a temperature not higher than 80, hopefully 78, 76 for most of the species that I'm using. Now, I don't even give them to my adults. The only adults that I use basking lights are the Panthers. The Panthers seem to need them. They seem to like them, and I haven't been in Panthers as much. But Jacksons, quads, ellioti some of them do like to bask, but they bask for 20 minutes and they're done for the day. Hoehnelii, it depends on where you get them. If some hoehnelii bask a lot, especially the ones with yellow, on their heads, the ones that's red on their heads. The regular green ones don't bask at all. So you just kind of get an idea, but it's enough to have that bulb over there. I just lower or raise the T5 bulbs to give them enough, because you wouldn't have a bulb in nature. You've got one sun that has the UVB, it has light, it has heat. And so if I can give it all in one bulb, better. The power suns and the mega, the mercury bulbs are just too powerful for chameleons, and they're too hard to adjust, and they're too variable. I think I did a video at one point where I was just checking out with UV index. I went from like a UV index of 1 to UV index of 12 in back and forth in the same bulb, same distance, different days, just walking in time of the day. And so I use it for iguanas and other things, but I won't use a mercury vapor bulb for chameleons because it's just so variable, and they're not able to get away, and they're not so big that they need such a big area. But I've got off topic. But I like that quad fixture. I just like the plant light that does that. I do have a few cages with a single fixture with a plant light like Arcadia's plant light, which really grows things great. Those are warm too. You got to raise those up. And I just have to be careful not to put a 12% bulb in those, because you put them too close to the cage and you've got a UV index of 13, which isn't found on Earth or what have you. So you're melting your chameleons. People forget that UV is good for what it does, but it's also dangerous. It's what causes skin cancer. It's what causes all kinds of terrible things that happen within our bodies. So it's a balance. It's with everything else: heat, light, temperature. It's
Yeah,
all a balance. If you get out of
my
balance, you've
yeah.
got
When
problems.
my father walks into my chameleon room, he's immediately like, "You need special glasses so you don't go blind," and like because he's so concerned about the UVB causing cataracts, and
Mhm.
uh, which
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
I gotta tell you, when I was, testing out all the different bulbs, and I tested out one of the Exoterra, they're what, 250? They're they're most powerful. Everybody says compact fluorescent lights are, no UVB comes after off of those. Totally incorrect. You get the most powerful Exoterra compact fluorescent light, and I was taking measurements of 150 UVI, 150, and thinking,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm starting to get concerned about my hand under there doing the testing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, UVB, you got to watch out for that stuff. Uh, all right, so let's do one last question on husbandry, and then we can get to some questions. I want to talk about supplementation. We'll start with you, Jonathan. What do you do for supplementation and when?
so similar to this conversation about treating the babies like adults, I start supplementation like a similar supplementation strategy with the babies, just like I do with my adults, which is Earth Pro A, and Revitalize D. I use the CalMag as well, as on every fourth, and then there's every eighth. It's multivitamin, and I've I've done a lot. I've done a lot of things. I started with um, like plain calcium and multivitamin twice a month. That's when I had my worst results for hatch rates and hatchling survival, because some of those multivitamins that are recommended are very strong, and so when you give those to a hatchling, then you get problems. So it's definitely important to say, it's like, yeah, I treat mine like my adults, but I also don't over supplement my adults. When I first started, I was using some multivitamins that are a lot stronger, and could result in over supplementation issues and growth problems with babies. So Earth Pro A is one that I've now been using for a long time. There was a period where I was worried about the perishable contents, and there's been debate about the potential for edema, and um, you name it, like all sorts of things. But um, on balance, it's been a great product for me, and I haven't had as much complication as others. Um, I did spend 3 years without providing any supplemental D3, and just used the UVI of 3. I've started to add some supplemental D3 back, and over the past year and a half, and vitamin and preformed A, and that's primarily because of the fact that at my scale, it's I got to a place where I was like, it's too difficult to monitor the very small changes that you would see in a supplementation issue. And so by adding it in at a very low dose, I found that helps, just for me. But I think if I only had a few as a few chameleons as a hobbyist, I probably wouldn't be doing that.
Okay. And for everybody watching here, the significance of Earth Pro A as an every feeding supplement is Earth Pro A is calcium, bee pollen, some carotenoids, and B vitamins. It doesn't have any of the fat soluble, the vitamin D3 or the vitamin A. So it's essentially calcium with carotenoids and bee pollen, as opposed to some of these other multivitamins, which have the fat soluble vitamin A, vitamin D3. So that's what he's talking about there. And the Revitalize D3 that he does occasionally, that does have lower levels of vitamin D3 and vitamin A than the standard Repashy supplements that are commonly used. Just editor's note there.
Yep.
Okay. But Jonathan, you start, when do you start giving the supplements?
Day one. When
Day one? Okay.
Fruit flies, they have some light dust on them. The other thing is when people talk about supplementing, if you over dust your feeders, no matter what age your chameleon, you're going to have issues. So less is more, and just a little bit, it goes a long way. So that's something else I would say is like, yeah, I do dust my fruit flies, but it's a little teeny little bit, because it's easy to get it on every fly in there.
Okay.
So
All right, Chris, what supplementation routine do you use? Oh,
I think you're muted. Are you muted? There you
there.
go.
Do I have you back?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're back.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so the question is, what supplementation routine do you use on your hatchlings or babies? Uh-oh. We're having problems getting Chris on there. All right.
Hey,
Sean?
Chris, you can shake your head, yes or no. Do you use Earth Pro A? Ah, he's
Oh, we
gone.
lost him.
Oh, he's going to try to
We
come
coulda-
back on.
we
All
coulda-
right,
we
Sean.
could have tried visual cues.
So I'm an old soul. I've been doing this for like 30 years. So I Herptivite or Reptivite, excuse me, and Repcal I've been around forever. I've used those. I use just the plain calcium daily on almost everything. I don't supplement silkworms. I don't supplement some of the others that have the appropriate calcium ratio. I supplement from birth. I know I give them probably one feeding without any dusting on, because I like to get them a little bit of water before I feed them and get them hydrated. But after that, I'm dusting away. And I dust. I don't cake. It's really important to dust, not cake.
Yeah.
And if I ever feel like I've caked, I just put them in a deli cup. I put a lid with holes in it. I turn it upside down and I shake them off. And if it comes off, it doesn't belong on them. You've put way too much on. So I also use Earth Pro A. I've used the Revitalized D3. I've been to a point where I'm kind of doing Earth Pro A and the calcium plain with a little bit of bee pollen in it, rotating those two. And then once a week or once every 2 weeks, I add a multivitamin. Now, most of the species I have, quads, the Jacksoni, I can't even think what I'm having. Jacks, hoehnelii, ellioti are fairly sensitive to supplementation, so you don't want to hit them with a bigger, more than once a month. Panthers and veiled seem to be less sensitive to it. They don't get problems with it, so I'm a little bit more willing to do that. But when it comes to reality, when you're trying to figure out and you're feeding multiple species and multiple chameleons in a day, you try to do the same every day. So I've kind of balanced it all out, given them all what the middle of the road would be, and maybe my panthers occasionally I'll do a little extra or something else. But it's daily calcium, daily bee pollen, and either Earth Pro A and the Reptical. And then I found the Reptivite actually saved a few of my species because there's something in there that isn't in any of the other ones that when I started giving that again, I brought back a couple of my hoehnelii that were having trouble. I don't know what was going on. I don't know what the difference is. I've looked into it. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I use it once a month or once every 2 months just in case to get the whole thing. Maybe it's a vegetable I'm not giving. I'm very, I've got other species like tortoises and iguanas and bearded dragons that I'm feeding vegetables to all the time with a wide variety, and I feed the same things to my feeders as I feed my other animals. So I should have a pretty broad variety, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, that's interesting. Because let's see, Reptivite, the biggest difference with Reptivite is that it has more phosphorus. And I'm oversimplifying thing. I shouldn't even say that. That's way too oversimplifying, but that is one of the main
They add
differences.
phosphorus.
Yeah, well, they have that. They say that they have that perfect calcium to phosphorus
2-to-1
ratio,
but not
Until
true
you
because
put it on an insect. Yeah.
Right.
until you
And then it's
put it
no
on
longer right.
a
Yeah,
high
right.
phosphorus cricket.
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
Right.
So,
But there doesn't seem to be anything else, but it may be the way it's dosed. It may be the way it comes. Acadia supplements are very thin, very easy to get on, very easy to dose, thin and not overdose or not cake things on. But I find that things start to wane a little bit if I use just them. And that's been my experience, but I haven't been heavily into Panthers, mostly Jacksons. Jacksons seem to be capable of surviving anything, but hoehnelii, ellioti, quadricornis, some of the other ones I'm quietly raising, they are very sensitive to some of this stuff, and I'm just putting less in there.
So, all right, to all of the viewers, we're going to start opening it up for Q&A. So if you want to have any questions that you'd like to ask the panel, go ahead and start putting them in the chat, and I'll bring some of them up. I can't find it right now, but I did find somebody talking about having problems with their baby chameleons falling. This is what about falling? My babies hit the floor in the nursery cages all the time. I think
the first thing would be like make sure that there's enough foliage and branching in there, so that they can catch themselves
and appropriately sized branches.
Yeah, appropriately sized branches that they can hold on to, but yeah, because if they fall, that means that there's a distance to fall, and that you can fill that distance with things.
But babies are amazing at what they can grab. So if my babies are falling, I'm worried about a calcium problem. I'm worried about a vitamin D problem. I'm worried about
like something else is going on there, but
in the diet that they're not getting. Are you not feeding your fruit flies properly? Are your fruit flies getting mold on them? Is something happening that's not giving them the nutrition that they need? Something's wrong. It's it's an
off behavior for sure.
Did you raise them? Did you take good care of mom? Did you was dad taking? I mean, what is there's something missing. It's not normal.
Yeah,
I agree.
Don't
when they fall, you need to make sure you have a soft landing, but they shouldn't be falling. You need to start saying, "Uh-oh, what happened?" And you can go back.
Unless they're a goofball that likes to climb on the mister. that one is always like, why?
Why do you do that? Oh, all right. So let's see. Waiting for some questions to come up. Oh, all you people who put questions in before that I have to scroll through here. Now's the time to ask those questions.
So just in the meantime, I kind of got disconnected while you asked me about supplementation, but I'll just add that I use Arcadia Earth Pro A mixed 50-50 with plain calcium at every feeding from day one till throughout their lives. And that's combined with a very almost insane gut loading regime. So
all right, here's a question for us. What about substrate or bioactive bottoms for hatchlings? Now, I know we talked a bit about having a plain bottom or a soil floor. So let's go ahead and answer that, but also add in, there's a difference between soil floor and bioactive.
Correct.
Start,
Yeah, so
Jonathan. What do you do?
bioactive is the
Okay.
only thing I would recommend between the two. And making sure that just like, so here's the first thing I would make sure people understand is bioactive is often done wrong. And you really need a lot of cleanup crew in there. You really need a lot of insects, and you need to supplement those insects with protein to get that population up. You need plant protein, animal protein, brewer's yeast. You need to get your insects to a point where they can actually help. Because if you just throw a few springtails and a few isopods in there, it's not bioactive. You really need to have a good filter at the bottom of the cage, and you need to get the population to a unnatural level where it's you're supplementing them to get that population up. You're trying to really get them to be blooming all the time. And that is what I've learned with bioactive, because I've had some bioactives that go south and they cause health problems. If they're not well maintained, if you don't keep the balance, and so bioactive is good, but it's actually more work. And if as long as people understand that, and they're going at it with that premise versus the premise that it helps them save time, uh, it saves certain time. The it it doesn't save overall. You really do need to invest in making sure it's done right. And so that would be my uh, my perspective on it, because I've had the experience of it the going south and having to deal with issues related to too much bacteria in that cage, like it getting out of sync and out of balance. And so you just want to make sure you maintain the balance.
Okay. Sean or Chris, you have anything to add on that with that?
Yeah. So sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Tom. Nope. You.
Okay. I used to be afraid of things like bioactive in the sense that the dirt, the rocks, the what have you, because chameleons died, and when they died, their tongues sticking out. I mean, it looks terrible. And I used to think it was because of the environment. I realize now, years later, that it was because the chameleons weren't getting everything they needed and they died anyways. There was not enough drop. There wasn't enough food. It wasn't the right humidity. You don't have to worry about all that stuff. They live in Africa. It's dry sometimes. It's bioactive sometimes. There's rocks. There's plants. There's trees. You don't. They're surviving.
Yeah.
Um, you need to take good care of them. So anything is possible. I like the bare bottom cages only because I like to be able to track the poop, and it's less work in the end. I just clean it out. I scoop it out. I do what I need to do. I've created my cages in a way that I can slide out the bottoms and just clean them and put them back in, and it's easy to do. But like you said, if you do bioactive, do it right. But in the end, you don't have to put rocks on your plants. You don't have to, make sure. The biggest problem that I see is the only thing is the first few days, their heads are big, and if you leave a puddle in there, they may stick their head in a puddle. But I have yet to see that happen again since I've been taking a tremendous care of the parents. So
It's ridiculous
is
because
it that I have a
they're
problem or
so
not? Right.
misproportioned at that age,
Right.
and so a little bit of water weight on the head, it's like
Right. So I'm not even sure that's true. That would be the only thing I avoid. And I made screen bottoms for my cages for the babies so that they couldn't get water And after a couple weeks, I'd take out the screen bottom and I'd just use a regular bottom and clean it up because it was easier to do because I wasn't worried about their heads anymore once their bodies got to be normal size for their heads. But I think we need to worry more about taking good care of them before they're born, before they're, take care of the parents, get a good chameleon, take good care of them, and worry less about the bottom of the cage, other than are they pooping or not. That's my 2 cents.
yeah.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah. So again, I use soil bottoms in all my cages. Part of that is the fact, like all my adult cages. I mean, it's a soil sort of garden planter type bottom that sits directly on native soil. So, and I don't worry about drainage. I don't worry about earthworms can get in there and all sorts of things. My baby cages, I mean, it's partly a function of, establishing a community of cleanup crew, so I don't have to clean up 70 every day. But I think Jonathan's correct about, it's not just
Set it and forget it.
it's not just a ticket to not doing cage maintenance, especially if you're doing bioactive in a single cage in your living room or something like that. I mean, you're really trying to set up a very artificial and a very specific environment in a very artificial sort of larger environment. So I mean, it's not just throw dirt in there and get a culture of ice pods and that sort of thing. So I mean, I like soil bottoms. I think it helps regulate temperature, helps regulate humidity. So there's a number of other factors, but yeah, I like soil bottom, but yeah, and I think Sean was correct too. That I think worries about impaction, covering your plants with pebbles or whatever the case may be. I think you should be looking at what's actually causing your chameleon to be
having an impaction issue. Like eating dirt. Like I've had my females in bioactives now for 6 years. So and I've never had impaction. I've never had anything. I've seen them, munch a leaf here and there, but I think that the the key is you want to make sure you're adding leaf litter back in. You want to make sure that it's like you're maintaining that environment. And if you're doing that, then the impaction risk is basically zero. But like I've heard some people having concerns about long sphagnum moss and as a potential issue. And I'm saying I'm immediately thinking, why is the sphagnum moss available to them? It should be under the leaves. That shouldn't be something that they could even access. So if you're using sphagnum to keep your springtails and isopods happy, make sure it's covered with leaves and make sure you have a good thick leaf litter cover and you should be fine. But it's just like anything that if you don't maintain it well, you're gonna have issues.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question about how we all started. You're all at different stages in the hobby to business spectrum. And so, Sean, go ahead and answer this one.
I bought chameleons. I put them together and they had babies. And the next thing I know, I'm selling chameleons. And next thing I know, it's cool. I want to go to the show and I want to be at the show because I've been going to the shows for 20 years and I want to be a vendor. And then I realized you sit 8 hours and you sell 2 or 3 chameleons sometimes and you barely make the money. And then you go home and online, you sell 10 of them and you just kind of try to figure out where you want to be in the whole thing. I've got a full-time regular job that I'm very happy with. So I love seeing the babies. If I could, I'd keep all the babies that I have, but the house, even though I have a large house, it just isn't going to be big enough. I keep throwing out kids, but I still don't have enough room. I have 5 children. 2 of them in college, 1 of them graduated, and 2 in high school. So I'll have more room soon, but there just isn't enough room for them. So I have to eventually sell them. The cricket bill, when the crickets show up on Tuesday morning, it's not cheap. I haven't got to raising them myself. I've raised silkworms. I've raised dubia. I've raised pinworms. Or not pinworms, superworms. I'm getting confused here. I'm getting too excited about all the things I'm doing. But you just got to pay for it to some extent. And when you want to buy more, sometimes the spouse wants to see there was a little money coming in to at least break it even. So it's not bad. She's tremendous. She's the one who bought me an iguana 35 years ago, started me off with this whole thing. So I blame her anyways. But nonetheless, you just got to find out the balance of what's right for you and what you want to do. And if you're going to be a business, you got to run like a business. Even if you're not going to be a business, you got to be business minded. You can't have not enough space, not enough room. You don't want the feds coming in and taking all your animals because you're not doing it right. keep your wits about you, think about it, and go from there. Not that I
Okay.
always do, but
All right, Chris, I don't know if we should be asking you this question because I know when you have hatch out those parsoni, you're keeping them all, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, but my alternative is to try to find homes for 20 parsoni in Canada, which is highly unlikely. But no, so I got started in this by accident. Years ago, when we first built the greenhouse and we had a koi pond in there, I thought it'd be a fantastic idea to release some sort of free range geckos to do bug control in there for me. And so we ordered some online, and they made a mistake and they sent me a veiled chameleon. So that happened. And then, as per usual, I became completely obsessed and started listening to a podcast. Yeah, it all sort of snowballed from there, and we still actually have that veiled chameleon. So yeah, that's how it started for me. And then you realize that there's a potential to actually contribute something to a community by focusing on a specific species or something rare that may not be available 20 years in the future, and the opportunity to sort of make that contribution seemed worthwhile to me. So yeah.
Okay. Jonathan, how did you get where you are?
Well, when my wife and I got our house, we got a dog, and then we were trying to think of other pets that we could have now that we have a house, and she immediately said chameleon, which
Interesting.
I was waiting for her to say that. She didn't realize it, and as soon as she did that, I was like, oh, I'm gonna go get a pair. And I had been breeding other reptiles, colobrid snakes, since I was very young, and I had seen chameleons when I was younger, available, veiled chameleons primarily, and had never had the opportunity to work with them myself. I always been very curious. I think I remember the first time I saw a chameleon in a reptile store, and I spent 30 minutes just watching it, just like at the cage, watching its eyes and its hands, and then I had to leave, and my mom was like, "We're not getting that," because she had talked to the owner and realized it was too much of a commitment. And so I had this experience of waiting 20 years before I was able to actually start to work with them myself, and worked with a single pair with the intention to have a holdback as the founder of my breeding project, um, because I understood pretty early on that if a animal is of a quality that you want to breed it, the breeder's going to keep it. And that's a very important thing to understand, because if you want to breed yourself, you want to be breeding that animal that they have. And it's the only way you get it is if you produce it yourself. And so by starting with that initial pair with the goal of saying, I'm going to get that, I want to find that animal in the clutches that I produce, and use that to build my business on, to build my project on. That was the mindset that I had. So I started with a single pair. I held back Jude from that pairing, and then I built my project on Jude with 2 females, and Jude, so a single trio. So I went from a single pair to a single trio, and each year was just scaling very slowly, like adding one more animal to the breeding group, adding 30 more cages for neonates, and scaling at that pace of like, okay, I have this many breeders, I need this many more neonate cages, and just kind of scaled up that way. And I think that there was a point then, obviously, where you start to think about how much you're investing, and you need to think about registering a business. And I went through that process, and like 2020, and so I registered the LLC. Maybe it was 2019, but regardless, got an LLC set up and started doing more distinct accounting for the project. That is it has its own business accounts and everything set up, formalized the business, and then so I've gone on that path of how do you scale up and how do you do it, at each stage. Like when do you start to think about things like hiring somebody to help, and because it's a lot. Like I have a full-time job, as well, and the IPardalis is my second job. So that's that, and I don't know. There may be a point where that changes, but that's how it is.
All right, folks, I'm sorry. We're going to take one last question. This is an important one, but I'm going to have to let our guests go on to their lives. But guys, if you'll just stick me around with me for one last question. She's asking about humidity for hatchlings. I think that's important. Let's talk about hydration for hatchlings. How is it different than adults? And one of the main questions is, now we've got our mist heads, which are okay in a 2x2x4 foot cage, but they start to get a little powerful when you put them in a small cage. So I'd like to go around to each one of you and ask how you handle hydration, and we can start with Sean.
First, yeah, I have to have some time back so I can get downstairs and clean up the cages and all those things that don't have bioactives in. But yes, humidity for hatchlings, it needs to be the same. They need the same humidity. They live in the same areas. They're a little lower to the ground, so they probably have a little bit more humidity and ability to do that. I hand mist most of my hatchlings, but humidity is in the water cycle is, you have to be thinking about the whole water cycle, not just humidity and what have you. So you need to make sure that you've got misty fogging at night. I start fogging at 11 p.m. I fog to 7 a.m. I fog enough that there's a little bit of dew on the branches in the morning. I walk in the morning by the cages. If there isn't any dew on in the morning, I spray a little bit with the hand sprayer, and I just go along the cages with the sprayer one at a time and hit it just a little bit. And then I let them be for the rest of the day. I let the cage dry out because it's very important that it dries out so you don't get mold and what have you. And then at night, before I go to bed, I do the same thing. I do a little bit of misting just to get each cage a little misted, and I just do it with the hand sprayer. Actually, I have it right here. Just use one of these things. I pump it up and I just push it and I spray it a little bit. And then I fog again. With the babies, I don't use a dripper. With the adults, then I'm using a dripper because from time to time they may need it. I don't use a dripper on every cage all the time. Quads are very water loving, so because I love my quads and I have to keep my quads because I can't get any more quads unless I go to Tanzania and steal them. I do dripping for them.
Okay. And Chris?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with what Sean said 100%. I mean, your whatever humidity cycle works for you with your adults, I think you should be replicating that for your neonates and juveniles. I don't fog at night. Again, it's a greenhouse, so the situation, it gets up to 100% humidity every night anyways. I think and a serious concern, like a full-size hibiscus flower can hold, like a shot glass full of water. So keep in mind when you're misting your enclosures for neonates, that's a drowning hazard. But yeah, so I mist with an automatic mister. It's certainly like a neonate getting sprayed in the face with a misting nozzle isn't awesome. I think if you're smart about where you direct that mist, point it at the ground first, and it'll move around in the neonate enclosure. But yeah, in terms of like what I offer my neonates is basically the same as I offer my adults. High humidity, plenty of moisture in the evening, dry out time during the day, rinse and repeat. So
okay. And Jonathan?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I would just say that when I use an automatic mister in a neonate cage, that I have the surface that I'm trying to cover on the opposite side, so that there's a good distance between the surface you're trying to mist and the mister. So you're not putting them real close together, and then if the neonate is actually on that surface, they get blasted. There's a distance where the mist is traveling to get to where you want it to go. So by doing that, you prevent any, well, you limit it. They could still be climbing the mister and get nailed. But the I just started trying fog, so I'll be able to participate in that conversation soon. But
Okay.
the other thing I would mention is just I use different settings with when I have a cage that's bare bottom versus one that's is bioactive. I don't want to oversaturate the soil, so I often mist less in a bioactive enclosure. Whereas when you have nice drainage and a clean bottom, I'm less concerned about that. So some of those cages I'm misting a little bit more, just because I'm not worried about oversaturation in the base. But and I know that the base is holding that moisture and providing higher humidity just as a function of what it is. So you don't need to miss those as much. So and it's always a balance. Like even but there's always everything you have to take everything into account. Like the new cages that Bill came up with the solid fronts, the acrylic fronts, beautiful. They hold heat, they hold humidity more. I miss them less. The medium, the I have every version. I think I have three or four versions of Bill's cages.
Yeah.
But then there's others with that have screen fronts, and those you gotta mist them. Yeah, I have those being misted a little bit longer, like 5 or 6 seconds more. And yeah, so it's sometimes it's difficult for me to generalize because I have such a variety of setups now that I've just you're adjusting for every factor. Does it have that solid front? Does it have a soil base? And making and what are the ambient conditions? For me, I get a big seasonal shift, so I change in the winter. The heat dries the air out, so I have to mist more and work on that. So it's it's something you gotta learn. So it's tough to generalize about it.
Okay. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for joining us and sharing your experiences. Everybody, okay, they'd be applauding if you could hear it through the screen. So I want to say, have a great weekend, everybody, and we will see you on the digital ocean somewhere. So we'll close off here, sign off, and thank you very
Good to
much.
see you guys.
Take care, you all.
Yeah.